Chapter 1. The Day Before Everything Changed. Daniel Mercer woke before his alarm, as usual. For a few seconds he lay still, staring at the pale outline of the ceiling, while the first traces of morning light pushed through the gap in the curtains. The house was quiet. Not peaceful exactly, but familiar. There was a difference. Peace was something people liked to imagine they lived in. Familiarity was what actually kept things together. He listened. There. A low, steady mechanical hum through the wall. Only then did he let himself breathe properly. He reached over, silenced his phone the moment it buzzed, and sat up. He had not really needed the alarm in years. Once routine got deeply enough into a person, the body took over the job without asking permission. He stayed on the edge of the bed for a moment, rubbing his face with both hands. He never liked moving too quickly first thing in the morning. It made the whole day feel rushed before it had even started. Better to start steadily, better to start clear. When he stood and stepped into the hallway, he automatically avoided the loose floorboard halfway down. The movement was so instinctive he barely registered anymore. He had meant to fix it months ago. Probably longer. There was always something more important to do. The back bedroom door was slightly open. He nudged it wider with his fingertips and stepped inside. The room was dim. The curtains kept mostly drawn to stop it getting too warm in the afternoon. The oxygen concentrator beside the bed gave off its familiar hum, the small display on the front glowing softly. Daniel went straight to it first. He always checked the machine before anything else. The flow rate was where it should be. No warning lights, power steady. No odd sounds from the compressor. Good. His mum was propped up against pillows, half asleep, the tubing resting across her face. The last couple of years had changed her in ways that were difficult to pin down in any one detail. It was not just that she was thinner, or that every movement seemed to cost more than it should. It was that illness had slowly reshaped the whole rhythm of her life, and by extension his. The house moved around her needs. The day began and ended around what she could manage. He had not planned for life to narrow like that, but planning had nothing to do with it. He adjusted the tubing gently where it had shifted against her cheek. Her eyes opened a little. "Morning," she said, voice dry and soft with sleep. "Morning," Daniel replied. "How are you feeling?" She gave him the smallest shrug. "Same as yesterday?" That was their usual answer now. Some days it meant manageable. Some days it meant exhausted. Some days it meant in pain, but unwilling to say so. You learn the difference by tone, not words. "I'll get the kettle on," he said. "Tea, please." He nodded and left the room, pulling the door mostly closed behind him. The kitchen was small, narrow enough that if two people tried to move around in it at once, they ended up in each other's way. It did the job. That was enough. Daniel filled the kettle and set it boiling, then stood at the counter while it heated. Rain tapped lightly against the window over the sink. Grey cloud covered the sky from edge to edge, the kind of low, dull weather that made morning and afternoon look almost identical. His phone was still in his hand, so he unlocked it and scrolled through the notifications waiting on the screen. The headlines had the same shape they'd had for weeks. Escalating conflict. Emergency talks, military build-up, sanctions, retaliation, official statements. He skimmed them and locked the phone again without opening anything. He had got tired of the tone before he got tired of the news itself. Everything was always presented as if it were both urgent and somehow still under control. He did not believe in that combination anymore. If things were truly under control, they did not need to keep repeating it. If they had to keep saying it, they probably were not. The kettle clicked. He made 2 mugs of tea, carried one back to the bedroom and handed it over carefully. "Careful," he said. "It's hot." "I remember how tea works," she muttered, though there was the edge of a smile there. He pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat for a minute while she took a sip. "You working today?" she asked. "Yeah, busy. Nothing I can't deal with." She gave him a look that was part concern and part long habit. "You always say that as if it means anything." Daniel smiled faintly. "Usually doesn't." She took another sip, slower this time. The oxygen tubing shifted slightly and he adjusted it again without thinking. She noticed, but said nothing. "You don't need to keep checking everything every 5 minutes," she said after a while. "No," he said, "but I'm going to anyway." That earned him another faint smile. "You get that from your father?" He did not answer straight away. There were some comparisons that made him uncomfortable because they landed too close to the truth. His dad had been the sort of man who fixed things before other people noticed they were broken. When he became ill, that had changed with terrifying speed. Daniel had been 10 when it started, old enough to understand that something was wrong, too young to understand why nothing around them seemed built to absorb it properly. Doctors, bills, waiting lists, costs, forms, uncertainty. Then the move back to the UK, half a planet and most of a life pulled apart in under 2 years because they had run out of better options. Then hospital visits, hope, deterioration, then no father at all. He had stopped expecting life to hold still after that. "I'll sort breakfast," he said instead. "You don't have to fuss." "It's not fussing. It is, actually. Maybe," he said. Still doing it back in the kitchen, he put together something simple. Toast for him, a lighter breakfast for her. While he worked, his gaze drifted briefly to the stack of letters on the side counter, bills mostly, utility statements, a council letter he had not opened yet, something from the hospital, nothing dramatic but nothing optional either. They lived carefully now, not badly, not in poverty, but with no room for arrogance about money. Once, when his father had still been healthy and working, that had not been true. There had been enough then, not endless money, but enough to stop every decision being measured against 3 others. Enough to plan ahead, enough to feel like the future had shape. That version of life had ended a long time ago. He plated up breakfast and brought his mum's through first. She was more awake now, though the tiredness never really left her face. "Eat something while it's warm," he said. "You sound about 50. I feel about 80, 27, and already dramatic. Only in the mornings." He made sure everything she might need was in reach before going back for his own food. He ate quickly at the kitchen counter, half reading through the notes he had left himself the night before. Pick up supplies. Check tires. Call GP again. Look into backup oxygen options. By the time he left the house, the drizzle had thickened into proper rain. He locked the front door, checked it, then checked it again. Routine. His car was parked a short distance down the road. It was older than he would have liked, but still dependable, and dependable mattered more than impressive. He gave it a quick once-over before getting in. Years in the motor trade had left habits that did not fade. He slid into the driver's seat, turned the key and listened. Clean start. Good. Fuel just under half a tank. Not ideal, but manageable. He pulled out onto the road. The world looked normal, but something about it didn't feel that way anymore. The roads were busy in the usual way, full of tired commuters and delivery vans and people who still believed 3 extra car lengths gained them something. Daniel drove the way he approached most things, quietly, with attention. He did not dart for gaps that were not worth taking. He did not sit on other people's bumpers. He had no interest in arriving 3 minutes earlier, if it meant raising the odds of something stupid. Traffic slowed at a set of lights near the town center. Daniel stopped, hands loose on the wheel, and glanced up through the windscreen. Something shifted in the sky. He frowned. The clouds seemed to ripple for a second, not in the way wind moved them, but as if something deeper behind them had pressed against the surface and then receded. It was subtle enough that if he had been blinking or changing gear or looking at his mirrors, he might have missed it. A horn sounded behind him. The light had turned green. Daniel pulled forward, eyes back on the road, but the unease stayed with him. Probably nothing, he told himself, then immediately doubted it. Work sat on the edge of an industrial estate in one of those low, practical buildings that looked temporary, even when they had been there for decades. Daniel parked in his usual place and sat in the car for a second before getting out, listening to the rain tick against the roof. His job suited him well enough. He had not grown up dreaming of second and third line at support, but dreaming had not featured much in his adult decision-making. He had done a motor vehicle apprenticeship at 16 because life had pushed him in that direction. Leaving school before GCSEs had not been some teenage act of rebellion. His mother's health had been worsening. They had moved to a different part of the country to be closer to family, and by the time they landed there properly, the school year was too far along for anyone to want the complication of taking in another pupil. So he had found another route. He worked. He learned. He stayed in the motor trade until his early 20s, then he went back to college because computers had always made sense to him in a way people often did not. Systems, logic, troubleshooting. Even games had appealed to him more for their structure than their escapism. He worked weekends in sales while doing computer science, then tried university when college ended. COVID wrecked half of that plan, and his mum's care needs wrecked the rest. University support turned patchy just when he needed it least. So he left, got into IT properly, and kept moving. That was the pattern of his life, really. Plans changed. Responsibilities didn't. Inside, the day began the way it usually did. Someone had already run into a problem and wanted it fixed. Daniel dropped his bag by the desk, logged in, and was halfway through checking overnight tickets when one of the warehouse supervisors appeared by the office door. "Dan, you free?" He finished typing before looking up. "What's up? Order system's lagging again." "Front desk says it's not pushing through." Daniel stood. "Show me." It took less than a minute to see what had happened. One queue had stalled, someone had kept clicking to force it, and the whole thing had started choking on its own backlog. "It's trying to process everything at once," he said. The supervisor frowned at the screen. "Can you sort it?" "Yeah. A few adjustments, a restart, and a bit of patient waiting. Later, the queue cleared and the orders started flowing again." "There you go," Daniel said. "If it happens again, don't hammer the input. It stacks the delay, right?" "Fair." He went back to his desk, headset around his neck, and worked through the rest of the morning. Password resets, an access issue, a printer refusing to the network, one problem that turned out not to be a technical fault at all, but someone plugging the wrong cable into the wrong place and then being surprised by the result. None of it was difficult, but all of it required attention. He preferred that to work driven by endless meetings and vague decisions made by people with no practical understanding of what held things up. Around midday, he stepped outside with a meal deal and a coffee and stood under the edge of the loading bay canopy. The air felt close in a way the temperature did not justify. He looked up. The clouds were moving strangely again, not fast, not dramatic, just wrong enough to irritate something in the back of his mind. A low rumble rolled across the distance. Not thunder exactly. It had none of the natural looseness to it. This sounded too broad somehow, too even. A couple of lads from the warehouse looked up as well, then shrugged it off and went back to their phones. Daniel stayed where he was for another minute, watching. Nothing else happened. Still, the unease remained. The rest of the day passed in the same rhythm, but small things kept rubbing at him. Network latency that should not have been there. 2 calls from suppliers asking if they had changed ordering windows. A courier delay blamed on traffic problems that did not line up with the route. Individually, none of it meant much. Put together, it felt like a pattern trying to form. He left on time for once. On the drive home, the roads felt subtly wrong even though they were full. People were distracted. Too many heads angled down at phones, at crossings. Too many hesitant starts at junctions. At one roundabout, a police car came through with lights on but no siren, and Daniel watched 3 drivers react 3 different ways, none of them especially sensible. When he finally turned onto his own road, he felt more tired than the day justified. The first thing he did on getting inside was check the oxygen concentrator. Still running. Still steady. Good. Only then did he properly relax. His mum was awake and watching television, though from the look of it she was paying more attention to the sound than the pictures. He put the kettle on again, made tea, and started on dinner. Something easy, something he could do while half listening to the news in the next room. The presenter's tone was measured. Calm. Almost carefully calm. Officials have urged the public not to be alarmed by reports of unusual atmospheric disturbances observed across several regions today. Daniel glanced through from the kitchen doorway. On screen, shaky phone footage showed a cloud bank shimmering oddly above a city skyline before the clip cut away. The presenter moved on too quickly for his liking. No cause for alarm. Await further guidance, systems operating normally. He snorted quietly to himself and went back to the cooker. "Something funny?" his mum called. "Just the news pretending it knows what it's doing. That's been their job for years. Fair point." They ate in the living room, plates balanced carefully, television volume low, the own small set of rules around movement and convenience over time. He knew which side to approach the chair from, where to leave enough room for the oxygen tubing, which cupboard door made too much noise if shut carelessly. None of it felt remarkable anymore. It was just life. After dinner he tidied up, checked the machine again, checked the backup cylinder, and went through the evening routine without needing to think about the steps. That was what repetition did. It turned necessity into muscle memory. Later, when everything inside had settled, Daniel stepped outside for some air. The street was quiet. A few lights in neighboring windows. Curtains half drawn, someone across the road closing a bedroom blind. Nothing unusual. He leaned lightly against the low wall and looked up. For a moment the sky looked too clear. Not just free of cloud. Clear in a way that felt wrong. as if distance itself had sharpened. The darkness above seemed deeper than it should have been, the stars behind it less like points of light and more like tiny breaks in a surface. Then it shifted back. Normal again. Daniel stayed there a long while, watching in case it happened twice. It didn't. When he went back inside, he checked the locks, checked the oxygen concentrator one last time, and finally got ready for bed. He stood in the bathroom for a moment, looking at himself in the mirror without really seeing much beyond tired eyes, and a face that had learned how to hold tension without showing it too openly. 27 was a strange age to feel old and unfinished at the same time. He had a car, a job, some savings if he was careful, a house that was not really his, and yet fully his responsibility, a mother who needed him more than either of them liked, two close friends, he still trusted one from school, though he lived an hour and a half away, and a really good friend from his sales job Wisting College, when most others had drifted away, and a life made up mostly of practical decisions. It was not grand. It was not miserable either. It simply was. And despite everything, he still wanted more from it. Not luxury, not status, just room, margin. A life where every bad week did not threaten to become a bad month. A life where the systems around you did what they claimed to do instead of forcing ordinary people to become experts in damage control. He got into bed and set the alarm out of habit more than need. Sleep came slowly, not because anything had happened, because nothing had. The whole day had been normal in the exact sort of way that made normality feel false. Outside, rain tapped softly against the window for a while, then stopped. The silence that followed felt larger than it should have. Daniel lay awake a little longer, one arm over his eyes, the uneasy feeling from the sky and the news and the strange, small failures of the day all folding together into something he could not name. Eventually, exhaustion took over. He slept. Across the world, signals flickered and recovered and flickered again. Animals grew restless in fields, forests, streets, and cages, deep below the earth, in places untouched by living memory. Old structures stirred as if something had finally reached them. Over oceans, under deserts, beneath mountains and cities, systems older than nations woke in sequence. And far beyond anything humanity had ever reached, something vast and patient turned its attention towards a small blue world that had reached the end of one age without even noticing. Daniel Mercer slept through all of it, for now. By the time he woke, the world would no longer belong to the people who thought they understood it.